Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, my game with Eloy and his daughter and Jose is tomorrow, and I have to level up my second level wizard because we started at second level to third level. So I've got some work to do with this Evocation Wizard. So I want to talk a little bit more about evocation. Now, I was actually corrected by Eric Worldender, who mentioned that I had gotten part of the Sculpt Spells feature of being an evocation wizard wrong, and the actual correct wording of that is, let's see, beginning at second level, you can create pockets of relative safety within the effects of your evocation spells. When you cast an evocation spell that affects other creatures that you can see, you can choose a number of them equal to 1 plus the spell's level. The chosen creatures automatically succeed on their saving throws against the spell, and they take no damage if they would normally take half damage on a successful save. And I incorrectly said that they were going to save for, if the spell would allow them to save for half, well now they take nothing. And I didn't mention and forgotten they automatically save on them. So what it's really saying here is that they take no damage. And I kind of quit back to him at the moment, like, well, why didn't it just say that they take no damage, and if there's any other effects, they save against those automatically too. And I'll get to that part because I want to talk about something else first. But definitely, I started thinking to myself, well, why did I not get that right? Why did I miss that, even though I read that a bunch of times? And part of what I realized was in the text there's a whole bunch of other places where there's exceptions being made to a rule. I think it's in part of some of the things that the monk and the rogue can do, for example, where if somebody else was going to be able to save for half damage, well, they already take half damage and they save for no damage. And so maybe it was just the curse of knowledge having that wording stuck in my head. I don't want to make excuses for why I missed that, but still it seemed just a little weird the way they worded that thing. So I started looking at evocation spells, and I want to talk about the things that actually happen for you, not at second level. I'll talk about that last because it's going to be the longest, and so I want to get back to that a little bit because it gets pretty interesting. But there are things that happen for you at 6th level and at 10th level and 14th level for any of the schools, but I'm going to talk about the evocation ones, and partly to talk about, to me, mostly how underwhelming they are. And we'll talk about the other schools. Trust me, we'll talk about the other schools later, because what I ended up doing today was way too much stuff, which I have the ability to do because I'm not working right now because I'm taking care of my girlfriend as she's in stage 4 cancer and all that stuff. But during the time that I'm not just actively doing that, I'm doing things like looking at all the wizard spells and figuring out what kind of spells they are, and if they're evocation, are they area of effect, or are they targeted spells, and coming up with ridiculous lists like this, and how many spells you have per school, which I'll talk about because it gets kind of interesting. But that's not going to be today's video. We'll just talk about the stuff that goes on with evocation spells. Now, if you count the cantrips, there are 40 evocation spells. That's more than any other school. But what happens if you decide to be an evocation wizard? And we'll get back to that, what happens for you at second level. At 6th level, you get this ability called Potent Cantrip. And starting at 6th level, your damaging cantrips affect other creatures that avoid the brunt of the effect. Okay, sounds pretty good. When a creature succeeds on a saving throw against your cantrip, the creature takes half the cantrip's damage, if any, but suffers no additional effects from the cantrip. Because usually, with cantrips, they save for no damage. They either take full damage or whatever it happens to be, or no damage. Okay, that sounds really cool, right? It's a little odd that you have to wait till 6th level to have that happen, but okay. Well, the 3 damaging cantrips of the evocation school are made with attack rolls. There's no save involved with these cantrips at all. So the potent cantrip has nothing to do with those spells. There is a cantrip called Acid Splash, which requires a dexterity saving throw, but it's a conjuration. Now, the way this is worded, I guess that my damaging cantrip, so I guess my conjuration now, even if they save, they still get half damage from that Acid Splash. There's another one called Chill Touch, which is made with an attack roll. There's no real save, but it's a necromancy cantrip to begin with, but it's made with an attack roll, so this really doesn't qualify. So the only other thing that qualifies for potent cantrip would be Poison Spray, which is a conjuration. So this great ability you get at 6th level, where you're damaging cantrips affect creatures that avoid the brunt of the effect, there's 2 of them. And they're conjurations, and that's it. And if you don't happen to have those cantrips, well, this nets you nothing. Okay, yeah, uninspired. There's another one called Empowered Evocation. Starting at 10th level, you add your intelligence modifier to 1 damage roll of any wizard evocation spell that you cast. And at first I looked at 1 damaging roll, and I think there's a few spells like Scorching Ray, Mordenkainen's Sword, Magic Missile, Chain Lightning, where there's several rolls which can affect different targets. In the case of Mordenkainen's Sword, you can sit there and attack people for an entire round. So you've got, I think, something like, or an entire minute, or maybe it's a little longer, but concentration. So at least 10 rolls, potential rolls, but it can only affect, you can only add your intelligence modifier to 1. Now, I'm assuming at that point, at 10th level, you've decided to really max out your intelligence. So you're going to have an intelligence of 20, so your modifier is +5. That extra damage is welcome. How does it really stack up to the damage of the other spells? Well, you look at, what you've got. You're by 5th level, as a 5th level caster, the 3 cantrips that are damaging actual evocation cantrips, they're going to be doing an average of 11 to 9 points of damage. By 11th level, so 1 level after this ability shows up, they're going to be doing an average of like 16.5 to 13.5 points of damage. So the extra damage afforded by the empowered evocation, another 5 points of damage, well, that increases them by about 33% to 25% of where they were, depending on like whether you're a 10th or 11th level wizard. So that's pretty cool. Overall, looking at, I didn't do an exhaustive look at the damage of every single spell and compare it to this, but it looks like on average, you're kind of increasing the damage to a spell above that level. So if you've got a 2nd level spell, if you're adding this empowered evocation to it, then you're doing damage more in line with a 3rd level spell. So not so bad. So it's not something to throw out. It's pretty cool, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, why does this only show up at 10th level? If anything, this should have been the 6th level ability that came as a member of Evocation School, as opposed to that ridiculous and completely worthless potent cantrip. Should have been back there at 6th level, in my opinion. So it's cool. It's a long time to wait for that. And, okay, at 14th level, we have this ability called Overchannel. Starting at 14th level, you can increase the power of your simpler spells. Really, ooh, tell me more. When you cast a wizard spell of 1st through 5th level that deals damage, you can deal maximum damage with that spell. Oh, all right, cool. Not just the evocation ones, but I just looked at the evocation ones here, because in general they do the most damage, mostly. You can deal maximum damage with that spell. The first time you do so, you suffer no adverse effect. See, it doesn't say. Let me back up for a second. You can increase the power of your simpler spells. When you cast a wizard spell of 1st through 5th level that deals damage. Doesn't even say anything about an evocation. Why? Bad writing. Because I think they probably meant evocation. I don't know. Just like I wonder if they actually checked what cantrips were evocation, which ones weren't. When did they actually write that? Anyhow, let's go back to Overchannel. All right, cool. The first time you do so, you suffer no adverse effect. Great. Adverse effect. If you use this feature again before you finish the long rest, which is a long rest, you're talking about sleeping, like you're talking about doing this again tomorrow, you take 2d12 necrotic damage for each level of the spell immediately after you cast it. Each time you use this feature again before finishing a long rest, the necrotic damage per spell level increases by 1d12. This damage ignores resistance and immunity. So doing the math, there's really no contest. When you're going to use this spell, you want to use Cone of Cold, if you can, unless the creature has some kind of resistance to it, because maximum damage of Cone of Cold is 72 points of damage. Second closest would be Lightning Bolt or Fireball with maximum damage of 56. So the maximum benefit of this spell, casting your Cone of Cold, is 36 extra points of damage, because you figure on average Cone of Cold is going to do about 36 points of damage. So, okay, now we're going to do 72. So you get 36 extra points of damage for nothing, for being a 14th level wizard, Evocation Wizard. Awesome. Now, what if you want to take a risk and cast another spell and take this necrotic damage? Well, Chromatic Orb might be your best bet in terms of a 1st level spell, because let's go with minimum risk, because we're talking 2d12 necrotic damage per spell level. So, okay, let's say I want to cast something now at this risk here, or I'm not even at risk, I'm going to take damage. It's going to give me a maximum damage of 24. But even so, like, the average damage of that spell is 13.5, so doing an additional 10.5 points of damage hardly seems worth the trouble of taking an average of 11 points of damage from 2d12. I'm going to take more damage than I'm going to dish out in terms of extra damage to somebody else. And here too, the wording of Overchannel is a little open to interpretation, because what it says is, let's see, if you use the feature again, you take 2d12 necrotic damage for each level of the spell immediately after you cast it. So, does this mean the actual nominal spell level? This is a first level spell. Or if I'm casting it using a higher level spell slot, well, like, am I considering it to be the level of the slot that I cast it at? Or am I just considering it to be a first level spell no matter what slot I actually cast this at? Because if that's true, at 14th level, I can cast up to 7th level spells. I have a 7th level spell slot. So if I can consider this a first level spell and only take 2d12 necrotic damage, well then I can do 98 damage with 9d8 damage with not 98, 9d8 damage with Chromatic Orb. The maximum damage of that is 72 points, which is 31.5 points more than the average of 40.5 points of damage with using it as a 7th level slot. So that's cool. So that's not so bad for taking my 11 points of damage on average. However, if I can't do that, and I have to actually consider this to be a 7th level spell, well then I'm taking an average of about 91 points of damage for my extra 31.5 points of damage using Chromatic Orb. That's not so good. I'm not going to do that. And let's not forget, you can actually miss with Chromatic Orb. That's a targeted spell. You're probably going to have some pretty good ranged attack at that point, and hopefully you would really take a good bet. But the way the wording of Overchannel is you take this damage right after you cast a spell, not right after it does damage. So those are risks that you may take damage and it does nothing to your opponent. Anyhow, I'm not going to go through all the other spells, but as far as I can tell, looking at all of them, there's no first level spells or any spells really that allow you to increase the damage over the amount of damage that you're going to take as a result of using Overchannel more than once. If in fact you can only you have to consider the level that you're casting at, the slot level, as the level that you're going to take necrotic damage for. There's none of them. There's no set of circumstances in which you're going to take or dish out more extra damage than you're going to take damage in return. So it's pretty much a one-shot deal. And if they allow you to cast, like, say, Chromatic Orb with a 7th level slot and consider it a first level spell, well, great. Then I would cast that spell or something like it. Maybe Magic Missile. But still, you're taking some damage. And even then, you could probably only do that maybe like once. I don't think I'd do it a second time. So it's really, at the end of the day, it's a one-shot spell, maybe twice, and only twice if you're allowed to, I wouldn't call it cheating, but be a little liberal with the interpretation of the wording of that particular thing, that particular effect. And at the end of the day, I think that's really bad wording. Because I'm guessing they probably meant, what slot you actually cast at. So anyhow, let's go back. Now that I'm like 13 minutes into this video, let's go back to the part that's going to take a little bit of time. But hopefully it won't take another 13 minutes. Let's talk about Sculpt Spells. Beginning at 2nd level, you can create pockets of relative safety within the effects of your evocation spells. When you cast an evocation spell that affects other creatures that you can see, you can choose a number of them equal to 1 plus the spell's level. These chosen creatures automatically succeed on their saving throws against the spell, and they take no damage if they would normally take half damage on a successful save. Okay, great. Wording of this is really confusing. If you're creating pockets of relative safety within the effects of the spell, they're not really making saving throws. They're simply in a zone where they're simply not going to get damaged. They don't have to make saving throws. I believe the spells should have been worded that they're not going to take damage from the spell. Or it could have been worded that they will not take damage from the spell, and if there is a saving throw for another effect, then they automatically succeed on that save. As an aside, I can see people making a really good case for you not being one of the people that you can see, because I remember at one point, let's see, Eric Worldander had said, well, you can cast something like Fireball like right on yourself and, protect you and your friends, unless you're one of the people you can't see. But, that's probably hair splitting, but I can see some arguments and some table flipping going over that. But this is where things start to get really confusing. There's a total of 8 area of effect spells which only do damage that you can save from. This seems really cut and dry. So the people you select take no damage within those area of effects. They're fighting whatever, goblins, grimlocks, some bad things. Okay, you cast your area of effect, your fireball or whatnot. And Fred and Mary and John, they don't take any damage. Great, okay. Then there's 3 spells that are area of effect where people in the area of effect take damage with a save for half. Okay, so now they're going to save for nothing. But the save also negates other effects which aren't damaging. So these 3 spells seem to be the reason that this wording exists. Maybe. You take no damage, and you also automatically save to not be blinded or knocked back, because these spells are actually Thunder Wave Sunbeam and Sunburst. Thunder Wave, you get knocked back, and Sunbeam and Sunburst, you get blinded. Unless you make the save and take half damage. But now these people, well, they don't get blinded, and they don't take any damage, or they don't get knocked back. Okay, cool. That seems to be, those three spells seem to be like why this poorly written thing is poorly written the way it is. Maybe. I'm being charitable. Okay, there's one area of effect spell, and where the people in the area of effect randomly roll to see which thing they must roll save against. Many of which are damaging, with 6 of them, but 2 of which don't really cause damage. So apparently these people take no ill effects from the spell if they're in the area of effect. Okay, that seems kind of cut and dry. So Prismatic Spray, you're good if you're Fred, John, or Mary, or whoever else I've said won't take damage. Okay, there's one area of effect spell where people save against damage, but there's another effect that can happen from which there's no save possible. So when you cast Audiluke's Freezing Sphere and your friends are swimming in water, well, they take no damage from the spell, from the cold, but they're frozen inside the lake or whatever it is. And they're taking no damage from that, even though they're stuck in this frozen lake or pool or whatever it is that's preternaturally cold. Okay. Because you created a pocket of relative safety. But somehow, when you create this pocket of relative safety, it didn't stop them from being frozen in the lake. There's not a bubble surrounding them or something like that. At least if we're interpreting the spell as it's written. Okay. Or the ability, rather, that it's written. The sculpt spells. Okay. There's one area of effect spell where there's no damage is caused, but there is a save against the effect of being blown back. It's Gust of Wind, and this is an evocation spell. However, there's no save possible against the persistent effect of Gust of Wind, which means that your move is effectively cut in half. So you can save, or in fact, like your Fred, John, and Mary, who have said, no, they're not going to be affected by this. Okay, they're not going to be blown back, but according to a very rigid interpretation or reading of this, well, then this wind that continues to push them back, well, you're not providing a pocket of relative safety for that. They just didn't get blown back in the beginning. But now the wind affects them. Okay, over the duration of this spell. There's one spell that creates a barrier that only causes damage if a creature crosses the barrier by attacking the spellcaster. And there's no save possible. I think that's Fire Shield is the name of that spell. Now, I wonder what happens if you cast this spell and you choose somebody to not be affected by it, but let's just say that they're duplicitous, they're a doppelganger or something, and they decide to attack you. Based on the wording of sculpt spells, they still take damage, because it doesn't say they take no damage from the effect or anything like that, although they're in a pocket of relative safety. It says they automatically succeed on their saves, and if there's a save that would give them half damage, then they take no damage, but there's no save here. So apparently they're going to take damage because they just try to attack you. And this is probably good because they're a lousy double crosser. All right. There's one area effect spell that causes damage with a save possible. And if a creature attempts to cross the barrier formed by the spell, it's actually a wall of ice, there's a second save possible because it's going to cause damage again. So it seems like your friends will be safe. But I don't think this has anything to do with their dexterity, in the case of jumping out of the way of the wall of ice as it's forming, or their constitution, where they're going through a pocket where you've chipped away the wall of ice, but there's still that cold air there. I don't think so, because you're creating, they're not really saving, right? Because you're creating these pockets of relative safety. I'm not sure why it's not safety. I guess it's relative safety because other things could be going on at the minute. There's a second spell, very similar. It's Wall of Fire. And this grants a save against the damage for half damage, and now your friends will take no damage when they're there, when you create the Wall of Fire. But if a creature attempts to cross the barrier formed by this spell on the bad side, because you can make one side really hot and one side not so much, there's no save possible. That doesn't matter that they're your friends, and you protected them from, and they jumped out of the way of this. Maybe they're on the outside of the Wall of Fire. They want to cross the Wall of Fire and get through. There's nothing you can do. They're going to take damage going through that. Because based on the wording of sculpt spells, there's not a save involved. It doesn't say they take no damage. It says they don't take damage when there's a save. Okay? Now, what about, because you can protect them. But not, if everything can take us, at its word, not so much. What about spells that have no area of effect, but they're targeted? What if you want to seem as though you're going to kill or injure somebody with one of your spells to try to fool somebody, but you want to protect them from the actual damage? Okay, like, John, you fall down, you play dead when I zap you with this thing. All right? As it turns out, you can use chain lightning. That'll work really good with that. You zap somebody with chain lightning, and then the other lightning goes out and hits up to 3 other targets, right? That's good because it's a spell that requires a save. It's not an area of effect spell, but it requires a save. So your friends will be okay, so you can hit the bad guy with the first one, and then, Fred, John, and Mary with those other 3 bolts, they'll be safe because there's a save. So they're not going to take any damage. You could don't use magic missile on them because there's no save possible. It just hits. Okay, you can't protect them from this, even though you're an evocation wizard and you can sculpt your spells. All right, there's 8 spells which target people which can actually miss because they're attack rolls, but there's no saves involved. So these aren't going to be the spells you're going to use to try to convince somebody that you just killed Joe when he's simply laying down and playing dead after you zapped him. So don't use like Firebolt or Ray of Frost or Shocking Grasp, Chromatic Orb, Witch Bolt, Melf's Acid Arrow, Scorching Ray. I guess Morning Canyon Sword. Well, it'd be pretty hard to convince somebody you didn't just chop them in half. But like Scorching Ray, whatever happens to be, don't use those because they say nothing about save. So I guess they're going to take the damage if we take this spell the way it's worded, or the ability rather, the sculpt spells the way it's worded. Now, Bigby's Hand can also cause damage, but this is an attack roll, no save involved. So it's too bad for your friend. So if you want to pretend to whack him or crush him, not so much. He's going to take damage. Bigby's Hand is also capable of producing other effects. By the way, I love the fact that they put all the hand spells into one spell. There's a lot of great stuff they did with the spell that's doing stuff like this, but that's awesome. I don't have just bad things to say about this game. I really like the game. But anyhow, we'll take this hand. So the hand can do things like push people back or interpose, right? So it's a number of people. It's not just one target. It's a whole bunch of people. But let's just say there's a bunch of bad people around Jim, and you want to push them all back, or you want to interpose your hand right there, but you want to, your buddy to be able to get through because they're trying to get him, right? And so you're going to figure, I'm going to use Bigby's Hand. Well, it's just too bad because there's no save involved with the hand spell. You can't save versus the effects. And if we go by our wording here, of this particular ability, it talks about, they're in a zone where they simply, they're not going to get damage, they automatically succeed in their saving throws, and they take no damage, it doesn't really say, okay, so you can't use the hand spell to save your friend by pushing these people back. So at the end of the day, I think the sculpt spell function or ability at second level is really worse. It's useful, but it's worded incredibly badly. And one can make a case, that the spirit of the idea would allow you to ignore the idea of the saves as they're kind of irrelevant, when you're protecting your friends, and instead allow you to completely control the effects of the evocation spells, regardless if they're targeted, regardless if it's a hand, regardless if it's the wall of fire or ice that you can say, you know what, you guys can pass through. I'm going to create this zone of relative safety. I'm guessing that's the spirit of what they were trying to do with sculpt spells, but the way it's worded is awful. At the end of the day, what it does is, I say at the end of the day too much, don't I? But what it does is, there's only a certain amount, the area of effect spells that you can do stuff with, and even some of those effects you can't stop because they're not saves. You get my point. So I'm a little underwhelmed, once again, with the abilities that the Evocation Wizard gets. I think Sculpt Spells is great. They need to word it differently, because then it would be fantastic. The over channel, it's like Daffy Duck said. It's great, but I can only do it once. And the potent cantrip is completely worthless. You got that second level. And the empowered evocation, pretty cool. 5 more points of damage. Should have gotten at 6th level, not at 10th. All right, kids, take it easy. Talk to you later.